up. Oh, that's right. Shoot. Okay, this is a stream for TO. On today's stream, we're starting to prep out the next wave of models. So basically what we're doing is we still haven't received the 3D printed icons from you. So we can't really finish up those models. There's a couple things we can do, but not really. I mean, we can paint the sergeant's helmet. And we can't really weather until we either apply transfer or the icons. So we're kind of at the end of those. We're going to start some new guys while we're waiting on you to send your other stuff back to us. It seems like you're really busy right now. Okay, so we're going to pull the models for the next batch, which is 6 eliminators, 6 interceptors, I guess. What are these things? I guess. All right. I guess these are interceptors. I'm honestly not 100% for sure. I haven't quite. I'm having a hard time keeping up with the new Space Marine lore. Too many new models. See, these are not just those. These are other models too. Here's the eliminators. Also got 2 lieutenants, 2 honor guard, a captain, and Gravis armor. Okay. 6 eliminators, 6 interceptors, 2 honor guard, 1 captain and Gravis armor. It says here 2 lieutenants. I think that's a lieutenant in Phobos armor, and I think that's a regular lieutenant. And then there's also 2 other dudes, or is these 2 characters? Which is fine. And then last but not least, we also have 2 Inquisitors. So I think that's over 40 hours worth of work. So I'm going to focus on these this month. This is pretty much exactly what we said we would do. So the goal today is just to glue down basing material. That's it. And avoid stepping on my cat. Buddy, you gotta move. got a bunch of basing material. Got some thin cork. Got some thick cork. I don't think I need any thick cork for this. Jesus. And I got some of that. And that's it. Okay. So looks like some of these guys have broken off of these. Actually wondering if I can just rock. Yeah, there we go. A couple of these guys off of these. That would make this a lot easier. Well, you're pretty well on there. And you're pretty well on there. So with those, I'm just going to have to wrap them, I guess.
Scheme as the infantry marines, but the bikes themselves are going to be the brown color that we just used. And once we've spray painted all of them brown, leaving a little bit of black underneath, we're going to want to use our ivory color to just slightly highlight some of the tips of the brown parts on the bikes. Once again, for every step here where I'm telling you to airbrush, you could also just use a lot of soft coats of a dry brush and it will look pretty much the same. That pretty much covers it for the base coats on our infantry troops and our motorcycle troops.
Okay, so here's the logic for today. The logic is to work that's mostly in focus, I think. So the goal is just to work big to small. If they're not on a base glued down, we have an opportunity to glue down a bigger basing material like this, which is useful. So for those guys, we're going to do that. All right. I'm going to try an experiment today. Cool. And we will need some super glue as well. Oh my God.
Hello, Star Wars fans. quick note that this review is just of Star Wars Squadron's single-player campaign. We'll have a review of the PvP multiplayer once we've had a chance to properly try it out after launch. Like the Force itself, the Star Wars Squadrons campaign is a balance. The balance between playing as both the New Republic and Empire, between arcade and simulation-style controls, and between explosive action and blunt exposition. The story doesn't break the mold or offer too much in the way of mission variety, but it's full of great references for fans and charming new characters alike. All of that is crammed into a series of super detailed cockpits that are still accessible enough for anybody to jump in and join the battle, which is especially spectacular when played in VR. Squadrons has found a sweet spot between the point-and-shoot simplicity of the classic Rogue Squadron series and the exhaustively detailed simulation of a game like Elite Dangerous. In fact, it's not too far off from the classic 90s X-Wing and TIE Fighter games. It's easy enough to pick up quickly, but there's also nuance to stuff like adjusting your throttle for better turning or swapping power between your engines, weapons, and shields on the fly. Those systems make flight more engaging and give good pilots a chance to shine without getting overwhelming for novices.
The Empire chose to destroy Alderaan in order to spread fear and douse the fires of rebellion.
The roughly 7 to 8 hour campaign jumps between the dueling perspectives of a crumbling Empire and a freshly formed New Republic just after the events of Return of the Jedi. The way Squadrons weaves the stories of two rival squadrons together is clever, sometimes having you spring ambushes only to have the next mission swap perspectives so you can deal with the consequences firsthand. It's very cool, supported by a cast of interesting characters in both squads, whether it's the war-torn Imperial Shen with his battle-scarred helmet, or the mildly Force-sensitive former racer Keo. I could see any one of them fitting in as a Knights of the Old Republic or Mass Effect companion.
I went from semi-pro racing to fighting the Empire. Quite a change.
But while their stories are well written and acted, so much of them are sectioned off in optional exposition dumps in your hangar between missions. That means their backstories are pretty much inconsequential to the main story, which is a real shame. That larger story is an entertaining one, though, centered around the New Republic's development of a new weapon and the Empire's hunt to stop them. It's undoubtedly amusing, but doesn't do anything too memorable with its unique dual perspective format. Neither side really makes much of a point, and your two rival squads never even directly clash like I so hoped they would. That feels like a missed opportunity. But this tale does provide more than enough reason to hop into the cockpit and fly some very fun missions. The story setups and gorgeously diverse locations make each one feel more varied than the shoot X thing in space objectives they usually boil down to. One mission sees you hijacking a Star Destroyer, while another has you navigating a nebula full of epic Clone War-era wrecks. I did wish there was a bit more objective variety, but the dogfighting itself is so good that things never got dull. Each of the 8 ships you get to fly comes complete with an impressively detailed interior. A functional UI is even built directly into each dashboard, but a consistent visual language for things like power and throttle keeps everything intuitive across ships. Those details go a long way toward making each one feel distinct, and you can even toggle off the on-screen UI altogether and fly by instruments alone. And while the 4 ship classes are shared between the Empire and New Republic, each faction puts its own twists on them. For example, TIE fighters, interceptors, and bombers have no regenerating shields, but more hull strength than the shielded New Republic fleet, making their missions play out a bit differently. Tweaking your ship's loadout can also have a drastic impact on its performance, if the mission lets you, that is. There's not much in the way of replayability here beyond trying higher difficulties or different ship loadouts for your own amusement. That said, there are some simple achievement-style side objectives for each mission that I want to go back and check off. I already mentioned that Squadrons shines in VR, and that might be an understatement. While also available through PSVR, I got to play on an Oculus Quest with a link cable on PC using a HOTAS flight stick and throttle, and oh my god, if you can play this way, you absolutely should do it. Apart from having to awkwardly watch cutscenes in 2D, it's just a phenomenal way to play Squadrons. It sounds cliche, but the immersion of taking in every inch of its detailed ship interiors or twisting the stick to weave in and out of Star Destroyer debris is exhilarating. Squadrons even let you extensively customize what UI elements show up, tuning exactly how much you want to rely on the readouts of your dashboard. These extra steps are seriously impressive. Star Wars Squadron's single-player campaign missions are a feast for Star Wars fans' eyes and ears, especially in VR. Its engaging space combat is a great balance of approachable arcade control with the added nuance of simulation-like systems. It doesn't end up doing anything too memorable with its charming characters or interesting rival squadron setup, but this campaign still tells an entertaining Star Wars story I enjoy no matter which cockpit I was in. For more on Squadron's campaign, be sure to watch its cinematic prequel trailer, and keep an eye out for our PvP multiplayer review after launch.
Work on the shoulders and the neck that we didn't finish last time. So these bits, they obviously fit together because they're both from the battle wagon. But what happens when you put these on is it makes a little lip at the back. And I don't want that lip at the back. I don't want the overhang. I want the model to be able to pop in there, or the head to be able to pop in there and be detachable so I can paint it. Because obviously with all this work and money gone in, I'm going to want a good paint job. As you can see, when I put that on there, there's a lip and there's no detailing on that lip. And if that's going to be the back of the model of the Typhonaut, I want to get rid of some of that and put things like this on so it overlaps a little better and helps blend one part to another. So it just adds that level of detail, having the detail parts overlap nice and smooth. So obviously I'm going to want to get rid of that. So once I've chopped that off, that should now fit on the inside of the model.
Let's do.
And I should be able to get a good bond there, and I should still be able to bond other things to it. Now I had a choice here. I could do that either way. It would fit either way, but I decided to do it the way with the least amount of detail on it towards the neck, as it's going to get covered up with other parts. And also there was some little notches there, and I decided I wanted those on the inside, so I could use those for bonding stuff together and resting it upon there. It's very, very fiddly. Trying to build the inside of the neck behind the head. So it did take me a long time to get this right. And again, I'm deciding at this point I'm going to take apart this, take apart what I've done. That's why I'm going to tack this together. Just a bit of pre-planning for the next video, as well as eventually I'm going to have to start working on this torso, and it's going to look great. I've got some really cool ideas for it, but there's always a lot of back and forth. One of the problems I had was this part of the model, when it came to the torso, was in the way, but I do want that detailing where the arm connects, as we're going to put the big claw arm for the Gorkanaut on this, so it looks like it's swinging with a lot of force as it charges forward. So we're going to have to cut that section out so it can later be cut out and stuck onto the arm. So I've took the gut off the model, and I've cut that chest bit off as well. So now I should be able to overlay the armor and other detailing over the top of that. Obviously, it's really difficult for me to get all these parts on here. I mean, sometimes you'll see me bring the vice onto the screen and start using the vice to hold bits of model. But I'm not Guru from Mortal Kombat. I don't have 2 sets of arms, so I can't hold everything all at once. And a lot of my conversion work, some people say they like my process, it's back and forth and it's checking out layers. Now I like the way that would sit across there. It's the part of a truck, and that's the side parts for the ram of a battle wagon, which we did in the previous video. I would like to layer those up, and I can obviously add green stuff and detailing underneath on the torso to have it digging into the model, making it look so like it's swelling out. I do like the fact the one on the right here has got the bolt, and the bolt looks like it goes through the other piece. That's the sort of look I'm going for there. layering bolts over other pieces, so it looks nice and solid and not just like it's stuff glued on, but like it's supposed to be there, which is another reason it takes me so long to get these videos done. I'm very fiddly with these. I don't just glue anything on. Everything has to be very precise and exactly where I need it. And as you can see there, you'll be able to overlap that and build up that stomach as well. So, then I'm obviously going to want to get in there with a lot of detail when I do the paint job. So I'm going to want to take the head off. But my hard was getting this in the exact position I wanted. I want the head slightly angled, leaning to the right, so when it's bringing that left arm over, it really looks like it's running at something. And with the mouth open as well, so it's roaring, running at something, like a huge metal beast thing. It's going to look epic. And at this point, I'm also testing some ideas for building up the bulk of the neck behind it, although I'm showing you the process, how I go about thinking about these things while developing them.
Looks good.
I don't actually end up using this part at the back there, although I was really tempted to. I was quite happy with the result I got otherwise. So you will notice from my process, I end up cutting lots of bits apart and then not even using them, so I am quite wasteful when it comes to bits, but I want my project to look exactly how I want, so I don't really care about the price of the parts. Does anyone remember when you used to be able to buy massive hordes of parts off eBay, and then people decided that they just buy those massive hordes of parts and then sell them individually, or in lots for like ridiculous prices? So eBay sucks for that now. Okay, I've replaced the pin paper clips with bigger pins there. Because the paper clips couldn't hold the weight of that head. This is the part of, I think it's a kill can. Or it could be a Sentinel, I'm not 100% sure. But the idea was to cut the ball off the top of that, and this is where I got the idea of building in the pipes for the neck. Because obviously the problem with an orc head and its shoulders and its neck is its ears come up to its shoulders and its shoulders come up over its head. So building the neck and the collarbone, I decided it'd be best to start filling those with bits of pipe and detail and green stuff in the torn flesh and other detail for the nurgle over the top of that, just layer after layer. So what I've done is I've added some very thin bits of green stuff, and I'm going to let those set and start building a rough shape for the neck. So once they are set, they'll be hard enough for me to drill into, glue on, and start sculpting on and building other things as well. The other reason I've done it like this is so I can push it back into place, and that skin will then push flat against the original part, the battle wagon part that we've been building. Just building a bit of a template there, a bit more of an armature. As you can see, I've took the armature off the neck at the bottom. I want to start working it backwards now, so it just pins in. I do realise there's a lot of video footage of me popping stuff on here and taking it back off again to show you what I'm doing, but I will try and edit this down as best I can for you. This is just me being really finicky with it, and I really want that head at just the right angle. So, and I needed to start filling in the shoulder parts. So what I've done here is I've cut some plastic card parts out and put some angles on them. I want this torso part on. I was going to go on the inside, but I like the big bolts on the outside. It really makes it look more meaty, bigger, stronger, more orky. So I put these parts on, the plastic card parts on the side. So I've got a template. So when I slide the head in there, and also these parts, I can pin everything together. I do make a little template under there, like a rectangle which attaches to the head. One of the problems I was having was getting the front of that chest piece that I want on there to stick exactly at the right angle. The head kept slipping to one side, and it kept banging into the shoulder piece. As you can see there, it's too far to the right of the camera. I need it further to the left of the camera. So the original head design, if you guys remember, you'll remember me playing with these parts and how I'm going to have pipes and cables coming out the back of the head. So started adding those on, although I haven't finished the top of the skull or the head yet, as I'm not sure if I'm going to put a brain in there or some controls or some other details yet. As you can see, I'm trying to get these bits of green stuff here to fit right against the plastic card white bits at the side. And I got really sick of the model not staying where I wanted, so I made an tiny armature, much bigger. This armature is actually the size of the Gorkanut itself, lengthwise, so I now know it's at least a scale. What I've done is basically just glue, sorry, just a sec. What I've done there is basically just glue some long pieces of plastic card, these are all plastic card piping, and bolted them together. And what I did, and I think it was on a Friday, I set a huge piece of green stuff under the neck, positioned the head, and every now and again just adjusted it so that when it slides in the pegs now, it actually has a box to sit on. This is going to make life so much easier because this torso, it now rests upon the front of that chest as well, so I can cover up all the other parts when I do the neck and into the torso. So this was the major step that really changed everything, making that new armature, and I got my head almost into the right position. I started adding, these are just out of the junk box, like leftover cuts of other stuff, bits of Sentinel, and just more of the piping that I use for the pegs. The idea would be to just have those running as an armature where I'm going to start building up the muscle texture and everything else. But I'm getting a nice solid box there now of, I can slide that in, I can slide it out, and I'm quite happy with that. These are a couple of bits of Orc motorbike. As I really like the angle, I'm just going to lay those over the top of the green stuff and the piping. What we're going to do is we're going to slowly start filling in bits and pieces here and there. It's actually a really simple process. I think the main part was getting the head to stay exactly where I wanted, and obviously making this so it fits nice and snug. So we've glued those on, and what we're going to do is we're going to add green stuff around the back, let that set so it's got a nice solid bond. Right, now I've taken apart some of the motorbikes from the Speed Freak kit and added that in there as well. I've attached that to the pipe with a pin and to the back of the model as well, where his neck would be. Now it's not glued to the back there, so I'm going to have to fill that in with some more piping and detail work to make sure it stays solid. But you can see I'm just adding little bits here and there, and then I'm having to take the model out, or the head out, sorry, and the neck to build on it and then slide it back in. That's probably the thing that made it take the longest. And I was going to do more piping on the other side that matched, but then this bit is actually the underneath of the Glockin. It's basically the Glockin's crotch area, for less of a better word. It's the bit that fits in between the legs and the front and the back, which means I'd have no use for it because I was going to cover that up anyway. But it does make an extremely cool looking shoulder. And once I saw that, I thought to myself, that's what needs to go there. And then some more detailing over it. As you can see, it doesn't quite fit, so it's going to need filing down, grinding down until it fits just behind it. I also had to take away along the back of the head and the neck to make it fit. But now it looks like we've actually got some bulk to the model. And obviously, this bit here, it's got an overlap the way it's been built, so I can't slide that in. So instead of sliding it in under here, we're going to put some bits of sprue to bond that shoulder bit on, and then we're going to have the head and the left side of the neck come out and slide on top of it, layering it up the same way we did the jaw, so you can't see the gaps where the jaw comes on and off because it's covered with the warts, but they slot together nicely. So done a lot of filing and cutting, and we've almost got a nice snug fit there. Really had some nurgle that it was missing, as at the moment it just looks very orky. We need to get some more Nurgle in there. And again, I'm hacking up some more of the bikes because I'm always wasting bits. And everything in my arm is converted anyway, so when I make bikes, they probably won't look like bikes anyway. That top of the head, still not 100% sure what's going to happen with it, but we are going to start building that up. So I'm going to file off the entire pipe for that. The reason I'm taking the pipes off this, I just like the angle and shape for those. Hopefully get it to go under the jaw and around the back there. It's not symmetrical with the other one, although I do really like the angle of the other one, and I'm more thinking a bit of symmetry. This way it looks like the pipes come out of the back of the shoulders and round the front. May even make some breathing apparatus. But as you can see, that's just been glued. The left shoulder's been glued on with nothing more than a bit of sprue that's been forced in there, let to set. And I really hurt my eyes focusing on this little red bit on that day, filing it down. But I don't know if you can see on camera, the little side of it at the left, there is a metal plate that comes out with screws in it, so it looks like it's screwed to the flesh. And now we've got some more piping that looks like it moves around. We've also put a little bit of green stuff piping, which I've shown you how to do before, on the underneath. And at the top, we've just added some random bits of pipe that we found that are a little bit wider than the last one. So it looks like it runs from the back, around the front, and underneath the chest armor that we'll put on later on. Well, we'll at least pin that on. And as you can see, it's a case of taking stuff out, reinforcing it, making sure it fits. Last thing I wanted to do with this was glue something and have it glue in the wrong place, which is why I've been using the process of bonding things in ever so slightly and then reinforcing them with green stuff or other bits of plastic.
Or birdie.
I was tempted to make more of that shoulder, but that's not what we end up doing. I was pushing this underneath the sprue that's there, just so it's got a nice solid bond. And obviously the other parts, what I decided to do was start bulking those up to make them look a bit more Nurgle-y. But again, I'm adding little bits on here as a template, just faffing around with it. But I did decide not to do too much on this side, as the angle of this neck and shoulder part on this side with the arm swinging is going to be really important later on. So until I've started the torso and the left and right arm, I don't want to do too much on that, as I may need to take it off and redesign it. But of course, as you can see, I've got my leftover green stuff bits, which I always turn into little balls so I can use as warts and other details. And you can just fill those gaps in. To cover up the gap between the Nurgle shoulder and the back, all I did was roll another one of those pipes using a comb and some green stuff. And I'm trying to mix and match it so it feeds around all the other details. And then I'm going to attach that to the back of the head, but then cut that off. I'm going to add a little bit of plastic card in there, or plastic card piping that should slot over that green stuff bit when it's done, just to add some more detail. Now, as you can see, we didn't get too much done in the length of this video. We really didn't. And obviously I pinned that front on there so you can get a good sense of what that's going to look like. But what we do have is detail absolutely packed into this. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some more of this project, especially that arm and that torso. And we'll be going back and forth, back and forth. I've got to fill that neck in. I can't do that until I start the chest and the torso part. So that's all there really is for this one. It's a shame I didn't get more done, but it did take me a long time to get all these parts in the right position and get them right. So I do hope you enjoyed watching the process and see how the Typhonauts coming on so far. With a big thank you to give out to all our patrons who have supported this channel. We have a big thank you to give out to the Up Boys, Matt, Ludwig Hoffbauer, D-Wack, Mark, Dave, Tom, Spiky, Luke, Warren, Ben, and Mike, White Metal Gaming. You are our top paying patrons. You guys are awesome. And of course, don't forget to check out Element. Want to help support the channel and get cheap models and hobby supplies? Click the Element Games affiliate link in the description for 15 to 25% off. Use the promo code BIG223 on checkout to earn crystals, because crystals equal cash in your Element.
Although everyone loves to play a wholesome video game like Mario Odyssey and Animal Crossing, there's nothing quite like that one game that features truly messed up characters. After all, it's easy to create a moralistically pure hero, but it is far, far harder to create one that's uniquely twisted. Mercifully, many developers are more than up to the challenge, creating figures that will leave you thinking about them in a cold sweat years from when you first saw them. And yet, you're still tempted to replay the games they feature in, seemingly just to spite yourself. While the vast majority of these nightmare children are horror villains, disturbing video game characters aren't limited to that genre whatsoever. Even fighting games have seen their fair share of unsettling and insane individuals every now and then. From a serial killer pig to an evil ghost child, there is truly no limit to how depraved some creators are willing to let their characters be. And we can only applaud their daring and nefarious creativity. Well, applaud it, and also fear it in equal measure. I'm Will for What Culture, and here are the 10 most twisted video game characters ever. 10. J.S. Steinman, Bioshock. Given that Bioshock takes place in an underwater utopia turned dystopia, almost everyone in it could be deemed twisted, as most people didn't take the whole trapped miles underwater without escape thing very well. Of this collection of miscreants, the most macabre has to be J.S. Steinman. A renowned surgeon who specialized in cosmetic surgery, Steinman accepted his invitation to the underwater land of Rapture in order to see if he could further revolutionize the field while surrounded by the world's supposed greatest minds. What actually happened is that he would instead get addicted to a chemical substance that allowed the user to alter their genetic makeup, which had the incidental side effect of driving him completely insane. Still obsessed with plastic surgery, Steinman would decide to focus on creating the perfect-looking person on unwilling subjects. By the time you find Stein, he's murdered countless people in his drug-addled attempts to alter people's appearances. Beauty is pain, as they say. 9. Evelyn, Resident Evil 7. The story of Evelyn is a decidedly morally complicated one. On the one hand, Evelyn is basically just a child with monumental powers who wants to be loved and cared for. Created as a bioweapon who could infect people with mold in order to control them, she was naturally regarded with a lot of fear by those charged with watching her. Evelyn doesn't really appear to have been taught manners or even to not murder people in order to get what she wants. But this childish shriek would quickly become a sadistic one, as the bioweapon baby would escape and then infect the family who took her in, using her powers to warp them all into terrifying monsters who were unable to free themselves from her control. This is exactly what makes the character so terrifying, as she is simultaneously a sympathetic character and an awfully cruel tyrant. Also, she becomes a terrifying ooze monster at the end, which lands her pretty solidly in the spooky bad guy category. 8. Dylan, Dead Rising 3. One of the coolest things about Dead Rising 3 is that the major villains are all based around the 7 deadly sins. This makes for some majorly interesting enemies, like the embodiment of greed, a doctor who's been using the zombie apocalypse to harvest organs to sell, or Envy, a man you initially rescue from zombies who becomes overwhelmed by his desire to be like the game's protagonist. They're all pretty out there characters, but one of them goes that little bit further than the others. That is the game's embodiment of lust, Dylan. Dylan is found in an adult store in full leather gimpy attire and wielding a flamethrower which has 2 circular canisters attached. He wields this in exactly the way you'd think the man representing lust would, complete with his death cries featuring oil spurting out of the device. He also speaks entirely in sexual references and slang, if that wasn't already very, very obvious. Oh, and you can temporarily stun him by doing a pole dance. Dead Rising really did think of everything when it came to this one. 7. Leland Van Horn, Condemned Criminal Origins. Now, initially, Leland, the main antagonist of Condemned Criminal Origins and its sequel, didn't seem like too bad of a villain. Sure, he was murdering a whole lot of people, but those people were largely other serial killers, who he targeted to try and give his violent tendencies a healthier output. Then the series' sequel hit. and Van Horn was suddenly kidnapping homeless people, performing sick experiments on them by improving them with embedded metal pieces. He made them fight it out in a makeshift arena to see which of his test subjects had become the strongest. It's a very quick turn from evil to super evil, and it's done so well that you're left wondering how you didn't realize it would happen in the first place. Brilliantly, you could realize this in the first game, as shooting Leland in the head doesn't kill him, hinting that the developers had more plans going forward. 6. Dr. Faustus. Thrill kill. When a game is pulled from release by its publisher because it's simply too violent, you know it's got to be something magnificently messed up. This was the exact case of Thrill Kill, a 1998 fighting game that was cancelled just before being shipped, as EA felt like the game's incredibly violent nature would stunt their image as a company. But it managed to sneak its way into the world regardless, as the developers leaked it to the public instead. When you see characters like Dr. Faustus, it's not hard to think of why it was considered so damn controversial. Every character in Thrill Kill is completely twisted, because it's a fighting tournament that takes place in hell amongst damned souls. But the disturbing Doctor is the absolute worst. A Los Angeles plastic surgeon with a penchant for dissection, the good doc would end up murdering several patients due to his unchecked bloodlust. More disturbingly yet, 27 cases of Faustus' malpractice would go unpunished by the courts, as they were regarded as merely innocent, botched surgeries. To complete the wild ride that is the character, Faustus would die after trying to surgically attach a bear trap to his face in the place of his jaw, which would, unsurprisingly, kill the guy. 5. Needles Kane. Twisted Metal. As Needles Kane, also known by Sweet Tooth in reference to the car he drives, is literally in a game called Twisted Metal, it was perhaps destiny that he ended up on this list. Not only does Needles play on everyone's instinctive fear of clowns, especially homicidal ones, but he actively delights in causing misery and suffering, which he also, coincidentally, excels at doling out. Indeed, this dude is so evil that he's actively trapped his former sane personality, Marcus Kane, away in his head, to such a strong degree that Needles doesn't even remember that he and Marcus are one and the same. By the 4th game, Sweet Tooth manages to get even worse, as he defeats Calypso to rule over the Twisted Metal tournament, meaning at this point he has control over a small army of similarly unnerving clowns. 4. Eddie Gluskin, Outlast Whistleblower. Anyone who has played the DLC for the first Outlast game has almost definitely tried to repress memories of the infamous Eddie Gluskin at some point after playing it. A serial killer who targeted women, Eddie was subjected to experimental and highly illegal practices via morphogenic engine, which is intended to make its subject able to control the mysterious entity known as the Walrider. However, Eddie, like most of the people exposed to the engine, proves unreceptive to the machine, which causes his body to basically tear itself apart, resulting in the lesions visible in his face and eyes, as well as making him go even more insane. As such, by the time the player finds good old Ed, he's doing exactly what he does best and murdering everyone. More specifically, Gluskin kidnaps men he comes into contact with in the asylum and tries to make them his perfect wife by removing their genitals and any body hair he finds. Saying it's a little intense may be the world's biggest understatement. 3. Sachiko Shinozaki, Corpse Party. Among the most gruesome and terrifying cast of Corpse Party's villain roster, Sachiko, a young girl in a simple red dress, really doesn't seem all that scary. In fact, it's easy to initially presume that the kid is a poor victim of the haunted school our heroes are trapped in. But it is basically the opposite, as it turns out that the ghost girl is actually one of the worst spirits to walk the heavenly host's halls, using her innocent appearance to befriend the living students who get trapped in the school, before torturing and brutally murdering them. Worse yet, Sachiko managed to gain control over the zombie body of the school's former teacher, forcing him to kidnap children who find themselves in Heavenly Host. From here, they're either killed with a sledgehammer or brought to her so she can kill them in even more disturbing ways. While it turns out that she is a somewhat sympathetic character, as it's revealed her twisted nature is due to being murdered after seeing her mother be also killed, and her violence is in retaliation, she's also intensely terrifying regardless. 2. The Doll Maker. Alice Madness Returns. With American McGee's dark imagining of Alice in Wonderland being one of the most disturbing ever, many fans were apprehensive when it was revealed that the game would get a sequel a whole 11 years later, as it was feared it might lack some of the edginess of the first game. Those worries were decidedly put to bed with the sequel's main antagonist, the Dollmaker. Not only is the Dollmaker physically terrifying, as he's all doll parts and black deadly ooze where his facial features should be, but he manages to be even more disturbing for what he represents. Because the Dollmaker is Alice's mind manifesting a physical monster to represent her psychiatrist, Dr. Angus Bumby. Despite his hilarious name, Bumby is anything but, using his job to hypnotize the orphans he was supposed to be helping to instead become sex slaves. His attempt to do this to Alice also has a much darker purpose, as she is the only one to know that he is responsible for having killed the Littles, after he molested Lizzie Little, Alice's sister, and trapped the family in a burning house so they could never tell anyone what happened. In short, he is the absolute worst, and so it's a welcome relief when Alice finishes the second game by pushing him into the path of an oncoming train. 1. Pigsy Manhunt. No list on messed up video game characters would be complete without the patron saint of weird, awful maniacs known as Pigsy, who is legitimately frightening enough that
A lot of writers base their stories off the well-established hero's journey, seeing their main character go on an adventure, overcome dramatic odds to defeat evil, and then find themselves a changed person. But some do try to subvert this structure, showing us what happens when the good side loses despite their best efforts and evil triumphs. It's not a new idea by any means, but gaming's interactive nature makes it more personal, as instead of watching it unfold like you would in a film, it's your actions that are instrumental to evil's success. Many games provide bad endings, usually as a non-canon game over scenario or alternative ending, but some games see evil winning regardless of your actions. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games where evil won. Number 10, Resistance 2. It's a common theme amongst trilogies that the second entry is darker, staging the odds for the heroes to make a glorious comeback in the third film. Star Wars is a prime film example of this, to the point where describing a sequel as the Empire Strikes Back of X franchise is as overdone as comparing a hard game to Dark Souls. However, Resistance 2, well, really is the Empire Strikes Back of the Resistance franchise. Developed by Insomniac Games, it's a series we've not seen since the PS3 era, and to continue the journey of Sergeant Nathan Hale, moving away from its original UK setting to the United States, fending off the Chimeran invasion. You work as part of the elite group, the Sentinels, soldiers all infected with a virus that enhances their strength. As the story progresses, though, Hale tries to keep this virus in check, stopping the Chimeran leader, but inadvertently absorbing his abilities afterwards. Hale leaves with another Sentinel, Corporal Joseph Capelli, but after waking up from their crashed escape vessel, Capelli discovers Hale has now fully succumbed and is forced to shoot him on the spot. Resistance 3 may have provided a happier ending, seeing the Chimera finally eradicated, but at the time, players were left on this somber note that would continue to haunt the Corporal. Number 9, Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus is one of gaming's most expressive works. Initially released in 2005 before receiving a full PS4 remake 12 years later, you play as Wanda, a young man attempting to save Mono, a maiden sacrificed after she was believed to have a cursed destiny. Entering a forbidden land on horseback, he seeks to make a deal with the Dormin, a mysterious entity with an alleged power to revive the dead. In exchange for reviving Mono, Dormin informs Wanda that he must destroy the 16 colossi scattered across the land. Except Dormin's reason for asking isn't because these gigantic beasts need culling. The colossi deaths take a great physical toll on Wanda as each one is slain, but upon killing the last colossi, it becomes clear that Wanda has been deceived. Each containing the individual essence of Dormin, kind of like a Horcrux, every colossi death led to Dormin's revival, turning him into a shadow giant. Though defeated by Shaman Lord Aemon, Wanda's blind love for Mono still led to their revival and sealed his fate. Number 8, Infamous. Infamous is well known for its morality system. Playing as cyclist courier Cole McGrath, you gain electrical superpowers after surviving an explosion in Empire City, and then can choose to either help the city, gaining positive karma, or act selfishly and build up negative karma. As you proceed, Cole finds himself at odds with mob boss Kessler, leader of the First Sons group that seized control of Empire City in the explosion aftermath. After several incursions, including his murder of your friend Trish, you'll eventually fight him. Regardless of how you played Cole during the game, though, Kessler reveals he's actually you from an alternate future, one now lost due to his actions. He also informs you that Trish's murder was to ensure that you never married her, as their eventual family stops Cole addressing the incoming threat of the Beast. Kessler's intentions may have been for the overall good, but his twisted methods brought misery to many, causing his plan to eventually succeed. Number 7. Halo Reach. Halo is one of gaming's most widely explored universes, featuring a rich lore that kept players hooked since its inception in 2002. The fall of Reach is undoubtedly one of its most pivotal moments as well, marking a turning point in the Human Covenant War. It may explain why Bungie chose this setting for their final Halo game, 2010's Halo Reach, as it's a prequel set weeks before Halo Combat Evolved begins. Playing as Spartan B312, better known as Noble 6 and Noble Team's latest recruit, you discovered that Covenant forces have located Planet Reach, birthplace of the Spartan 2 program, and have begun a full-scale invasion. Coming into contact with the Spartans program creator, Dr. Halsley, Noble Team became entrusted with taking Cortana to the UNSC's Pillar of Autumn ship, containing information about an alien artifact that can end the war. Its tagline, "From the beginning you know the end," is apt though, as anyone familiar with Halo knows just why it's called the Fall of Reach. Staying behind to ensure Autumn's escape, almost every member is slowly taken down one by one, ending with Six's last stand against Covenant forces. The Covenant may have eventually been defeated, but the legacy of Noble Team was not forgotten, seeing Reach become a rallying cry amongst human forces. Number 6. XCOM Enemy Unknown. Firaxis Games successfully revived XCOM back in 2012 with XCOM Enemy Unknown, rebooting the popular franchise that had been dormant since 2001's XCOM Enforcer. Set amidst an alternate Earth, you were tasked with controlling the XCOM, a paramilitary organization designed to defend Earth from alien invasion by the Imperials, a species possessing powerful psionic abilities. Discovering that they've experimented on humanity in an attempt to find a species worthy of uplifting, humanity doesn't take kindly to this, and XCOM successfully kills their leader, the Uber Ethereal, and causes their ship to self-destruct. At the end of the game, players thought they were successful in fending off the invasion, but 2016's XCOM 2 revealed a different outcome entirely. Set 20 years after Enemy Unknown, it reveals that you actually lost the war after the Council of Nations surrendered, a new puppet regime called Advent has been installed, and XCOM has become an underground resistance force. Initially trying to win over people via propaganda, XCOM 2 ends with the Advent's crimes being brought to light and its forces being overwhelmed. Still, it's clear that the war isn't over just yet. Number 5. Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. Kingdom Hearts may be gaming's most convoluted franchise, but Birth by Sleep was undoubtedly one of its strongest entries. Releasing back in 2010, it's the 6th installment in the franchise, but served as a prequel set 10 years before the first game. Revealing primary antagonist Master Xehanort's origins, it moved away from the exploits of Sora and Raikou, focusing on new protagonists.
Being the bad guy is fun, isn't it? I mean, not in real life, of course, where there are all these pesky repercussions for all of your actions and jail sentences that just have to be served. But you know what? In video games, you can basically be a right dick without any of the existential guilt. Now, true, you can also be the hero and save the day, but that's just so boring when you consider the alternative. Why not capture people in Fable and sacrifice them to a comically Machiavellian cult, or act like an animal in GTA? Or why not play a game that lets you be an absolute bastard from start to finish? Usually, when you play video games, even those that cast you in a negative light, always end up siding with the light side. But not these games, because these let you delve deep into the barrel of rotten apples and pull out some absolute stinkers. So with this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games where you are definitely the bad guy. Oh, and before we begin, the original article that this was based on had hatred as number 10, but I ain't going to talk about that absolute toilet, so instead, number 10, Lord of the Rings Conquest. Have you ever watched the Lord of the Rings films and thought, nah, sorry pal, the orcs and flying dragon demons would have definitely won these fights? If so, I totally feel you, my friend, and I can tell you this for certain, the Lord of the Rings Conquest is the game for you. Well, I mean, technically it's just an okay game that was basically Star Wars Battlefront with a high fantasy reskin, and it was clunkier than an elephant with platform shoes on. However, it did have one massive saving grace, and that was letting you play as the armies of Mordor in the evil campaign. The rise of Sauron, as it's known, allowed you to command hordes of filthy, wretched orcs and goblins as you fought back against the shiny forces of good. And not only do you get to rewrite the history of the books and films by winning all of the major battles and crushing the Lecious moment, where at the end of this campaign, you get to destroy the Shire. And I mean properly destroy it. You get to burn down its houses. You get to annihilate the local population. And to top it all off, when Gandalf makes his last stand, you get to be Sauron himself and absolutely mash his face with your mace. You will be cackling from start to finish and just wish that you could play more of this evil campaign. Number 9, God of War 2005. While it's fair to say that the recent soft reboot of the God of War franchise made a major attempt to rehabilitate protagonist Kratos, as depicted in the original run of the games, he's a real piece of work, alright? In the latest game, he acknowledges to his son that he's killed a lot of people that didn't deserve it, and it was a past that he would love to forget. And while it's true that many of the gods that he was fighting were bigger assholes than himself, he was never, ever able to take the higher moral ground. Even if you let him off the hook for being manipulated into killing his own wife and daughter in the first game, Kratos still routinely killed innocents without a care in the world, especially Poseidon's princess in God of War 3, whose body he used to open a door, resulting in her eventually being crushed to death. And strangely enough, in the second and third games, we've lost all semblance of morality from the man, as his acts of terror and violence far outweighed the justification he had for taking on the gods head on. In short, he might be human, but there's little humanity left inside him, which makes the latest installment all the more breathtaking at this reversal of character. Number 8, GoldenEye Rogue Agent. This is an especially enjoyable entry because the overwhelming majority of James Bond games cast the player, funnily enough, in the role of 007 himself. The GoldenEye Rogue Agent boldly placed players in the shoes of GoldenEye, a disgraced ex-MI6 agent who was dismissed for his unconventional methods, and ends up recruited by the villainous Goldfinger to assassinate another classic Bond antagonist, Dr. No. Though precious little of Rogue Agent can be taken seriously in the context of Bond lore, it's definitely a fun what-if scenario, and one elevated by the player's ability to use their golden eye tech to see through walls, hack equipment, deflect bullets, and generate a magnetic field to blast enemies to their doom. It's pure over-the-top action that will leave you smiling ear to ear. It's possibly a shame that there's no mustache twirl button for how evil things can get, but you know what? We'll take what we can get when it comes to living out being the baddest Bond villain you can play as. Well, outside of Oddjob and GoldenEye 64, because if you picked him, you were just plain bad, because it was like the sense of you're a bad bloody friend. Number 7, Overlord. I mean, you can't get much more evil than actually playing as a bona fide Lord of Destruction who is just seeking to enslave the world under their iron-fisted rule, can you? And that's just a power fantasy that Overlord lets you indulge in. And the best thing about this is that it really nails how much of a cad you are by barely making the player control the Overlord themselves and instead delegating all of the fighting and action to his numerous minions. They're expendable after all, so why not fling them into the blades of those trying to oppose you? You've got to keep that evil armor free of viscera, right? The heroes of this world are warped versions of well-known classics, but the evil that you exude from your blackened stare is something so over the top that it becomes kind of like a pantomime. I mean, to give it context, there's a level in the second game where you can club baby seals to death. Baby seals. It is a brutal moment that is so ridiculous that you can't help but laugh at what is essentially something so utterly horrible. So yeah, if you've ever wanted to be a dick and manage a group of peons, then, you know what, come work here, first off, and also play Overlord 1 and 2, as it is a guilty pleasure from start to finish. Number 6, Jaws Unleashed. You can certainly argue that sharks weren't really seen as bad at all until Steven Spielberg's Jaws created a global moral panic centered around the safety of the world's beaches and the animal's supposed bloodthirsty nature. And though the first stab at the Jaws game on the NES cast the player as a human hero, 2006's Jaws Unleashed realized how much cooler it'd be to play as the apparent villain of the Jaws world, the damn shark itself. The game allows the player to roam free through the ocean depths, annihilating humans and animals alike, and earning upgrades to their murderous faculties in the process. That's right, you upgrade a shark. Why are you still watching this? You need to play this now. Even accepting society's general misguided hatred of sharks, the fact that this game literally encourages you to eat innocent people probably means that you're most definitely the bad guy, and it's never been more fun. Number 5. Grand Theft Auto 5. The Grand Theft Auto series effectively built its brand on demented wish fulfillment by allowing players to control a cast of morally bankrupt people who will murder anyone in sight in the pursuit of material gain. This reached its apex in Grand Theft Auto 5, for while 2 of the game's 3 protagonists, Michael and Franklin, are arguably somewhat sympathetic despite their obvious moral failings, the same can't be said for Trevor Phillips. This psychotic, self-involved maniac is effectively a self-insert for the player's basest and most savage desires, and the devs even hinted that Trevor was the manifestation of their fan base, and so just let him loose on the world to cause utter mayhem. Trevor is such an evil character, simply because he has no care nor want to respect the lives of anyone else, and yet he's become one of the most popular protagonists of the franchise, simply because he caters to the ineffable need within the player base to kill and cause chaos. I mean, if the mirror is being held up to society here, it's not an image that we like to look at for too long, but you know what? It's fun while it lasts. Number 4, Kane and Lynch. The Kane and Lynch games present players with 2 of the most detestable protagonists of any AAA franchise from the last 20 years, and that is saying something. The title characters are 2 vicious criminals who will murder just about anyone who gets in their way. And despite the series' attempt to make them mildly sympathetic, like introducing that Kane has a daughter and that Lynch is extremely mentally ill, it's tough to shake just how overpoweringly terrible the 2 men are in the actions they commit, and also at how it paints those suffering from mental illness as violent psychopaths. And this is even before you add in that Kane stole from his former partners and that Lynch is also a drug addict. It got so bad that review outlets for both games commented on how horrible the pair were and how no one enjoyed playing as them. Even with the prolonged attempts to humanize them, it's almost impossible to feel anything but resentment as you play through more gore and violence. If ever there was a game that allowed you to play definitely as the bad guys but make you want to be a saint afterwards, this is it. Number 3, Destroy All Humans. The Destroy All Humans games see the player take control of Crypto, an alien who comes to Earth to harvest DNA from humans in order to ensure the survival of his own race. Unsurprisingly, given the game's title, harvesting DNA is hardly a harmless process, and the player is outfitted with an eccentric array of weapons in order to wreak havoc on Earth, allowing them to burn, disintegrate, and even anally probe those poor Earthlings who are just trying to go about living their lives. In all honesty, it's a game that pretty much details what would actually happen to us should we be invaded, aka run around clueless while the media make bank off reporting on the events. You're able to cause property damage on a biblical scale, and though the game's tone is thoroughly tongue-in-cheek, it's still pretty hilarious and grim to watch brains and spines fly all over the place. And despite playing as this alien menace, I can't wait for the remaster that's coming out this year. It's gonna be gross. Number 2, Rampage. The Rampage games were basically what I imagine having kids is like, a series of little monsters destroying everything society holds dear with little to no care, although maybe less eating of people whole though. The goal of these titles was to literally level all the buildings in your vicinity while munching people like they were Skittles, and if anyone gave you any guff about it, you just squashed them into the ground like a fleshy tent peg. And yet, while these creatures might all be cutesy, they are most definitely the bad guys. After all, these are cities full of people who've never hurt you, so you're just an asshole for coming in and smashing up their reasonably priced homes. In fact, so evil were the monsters that it presented a bit of a problem for the recent movie adaptation, which, in order to get the audience on side, transformed Gorilla George from a carnage-loving monster into The Rock's well-meaning, oversized pet. It's a bit of a downgrade, if you ask me. And number 1, Dungeon Keeper. Dungeon Keeper is a legendary strategy game where the player builds and manages a dungeon with the intent of preventing heroes from breaching it while at the same time making sure that other dungeon keepers are put out of business. What really sets Dungeon Keeper apart from other God games is basically how deliciously demented its sense of humour is, namely how you're not so subtly encouraged to torture, murder, or steal from anyone who opposes you, and even abuse your own minions to make them work faster. There's a deep-seated cruelty to the bad deeds on offer here that's kind of missing from most other games on this list, because you're effectively given permission to put your victims through the prolonged wringer of suffering rather than simply wipe them out. It definitely has never been better to be so bad. Well, except for when EA brought the franchise back and put microtransactions and paywalls everywhere. Now that, my friends, is truly evil. We didn't like it one bit. And there we go, those were 10 video games where you are definitely the bad guy. I hope that you enjoyed that, my friends, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section.
You know what really sucks? An awesome-looking game is announced, it's marketed to breaking point, a hype train gathers steam, only for its release to be a disappointing damp squib that alienates its entire fanbase. Hashtag Watchdogs, hashtag Aliens Colonial Marines. Similarly galling is when an established franchise releases its latest entry only for it to be a squeaky fart. Like the squeakiest of farts that was Mass Effect Andromeda. Or Ass Effect. A franchise releases its latest entry to Steam only for its release to be a disappointing damp squib that alienates its entire fanbase. Hashtag Watchdogs, hashtag Aliens Colonial Marines. Similarly galling is when an established franchise releases its latest entry only for it to be a squeaky fart. Like the squeakiest of farts that was Mass Effect Andromeda. Or Ass Effect Andromeda, if you will. But it's not all reason to despair, because there is actually another side to that coin. That lovely surprise we all get when a game that no one expected to be any good turns out to be a new classic. Sometimes developers can just pull it out of the bag, restoring our faith in the medium just as we were feeling resigned to accepting more Call of Duty sequels and loot box riddled EA crap. Whether it's a new IP that sounded poor on paper, a surprisingly solid movie tie-in, or a game that finally escapes its franchise's less than favourable legacy. There are plenty of games that give us that warm, fuzzy feeling in the sea of disappointments. I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 10 brilliant video games that surprised everyone. 10. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. While not a masterpiece, and by no means the greatest entry in the Assassin's Creed series, that honour will always be Black Flag, by the way, Assassin's Creed Syndicate was awaited with dread rather than excitement. Unity, released the previous year, was rife with technical issues and dogged by microtransactions, and many considered it the death knell of Assassin's Creed. However, the release of Syndicate was a pleasant surprise for a weary fanbase. Its Victorian setting was exceptionally well realised, the protagonists were likeable and engaging, and combat had a much-needed revamp. Hand-to-hand brawling was the order of the day, and fights frequently involved large groups of urchins in dust clouds of flailing limbs and broken teeth. Central assassinations were also vastly improved, and were much more rewarding for the player than in previous entries. Here, you're simply given a multifaceted location and the assassination target, and you're free to go about the kill as you see fit. Want to sneak up on the evil doctor and give him a classic hidden blade treatment? Perfectly viable. Want to pose as a corpse and then leap off the operating table and stab him up in front of a theatre full of horrified onlookers? Also viable, and also way better. 9. Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. Since Melbourne houses early Lord of the Rings text adventures released in the 1980s, the Lord of the Rings franchise has had a bumpy ride in gaming. The film's trilogy video game adaptations were, fun enough, but they were short, linear, and carried the odour of hacked-out licensed games. A slew of dry, real-time strategy games followed, and aside from the successful MMORPG Lord of the Rings Online, nothing lived up to the legendary franchise. That is until Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, an original story bridging the gap between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The game focused more on Uruks and their role in Mordor than the stories of elves, dwarves, hobbits, and wizards. Quite the risk, considering the lack of depth the Uruks have been afforded previously. The risk paid off very well indeed, as the game's much-touted Nemesis system presented a nuanced hierarchy full of power struggles, lively characters, and that one Uruk who would hound you right up until your final confrontation at the Black Gate. It helped that the combat was both visceral and challenging, and made every battle with the endless army of goons feel intense and rewarding. Solid proof that an unusual focus and some narrative risks are worth taking still in that tired world of AAA gaming. 8. Mad Max. Despite releasing in 2015, the very same year as the release of George Miller's masterful Mad Max Fury Road, Avalanche's entry into the Mad Max mythology is not a direct adaptation or spin-off. It is, in keeping with Mad Max's ambiguous continuity, a separate chapter in the legend of the eponymous Mad Max, and it is absolutely head-crushingly awesome. Taking elements from the original trilogy of films and the newest entry alike, Mad Max places the player in a vast, hostile desert, a lot of which turns out to be a dried-out ocean floor. True to form, Max's overarching goal is simply to get his damn car back from Scarborough's Scrotus. The gameplay focuses on vehicular combat, a genre which has barely seen the light of day since the late 90s, and executes this with incredible style and aplomb. Souped-up cars thunder across the wasteland, battling out and exploding in showers of white-hot metal and glass, and the trail of destruction left behind is a sight to behold. The game's other elements also fit together very well, with hand-to-hand combat feeling weighty and muscular, and the game's central car customization mechanic allowing the player to construct their very own magnum opus of a vehicle. 7. Batman Arkham Asylum. 2009's Batman Arkham Asylum was an unexpected entry in Batman's gaming portfolio, and one which made a greater impact than could possibly have been imagined at the time. After a string of mediocre side-scrolling beat-em-ups in the 80s and 90s, and then a host of 3D games that ranged from forgettable to atrocious, there was no real benchmark. Arkham Asylum was released slap bang in the middle of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight saga, with the franchise enjoying a renewed level of appreciation a decade after Joel Schumacher's bad acid trip that was Batman and Robin. Rather than cash in on Nolan's universe, however, Rocksteady opted to take primary influence from the universally beloved animated series, bringing in veteran voice actors like Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill to voice Batman and the Joker respectively. The result was a game with exceptional atmosphere and design, and perfectly balanced gameplay. A well-crafted mix of methodical detective work and awesome free-flowing combat, which only got better as the series went on, by the way, that has since been co-opted by almost every melee-focused gaming franchise. This is a game where you truly feel like Batman. Yes, it's a cliche, and yes, it's true, okay? You really feel like Batman. 6. Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. What happens when you take gaming's most beloved mascot and pair him with gaming's most irritating, obnoxious army of screeching sidekicks? And what happens when you pair them in a game whose whole genre is completely alien to both franchises? Somehow you aren't greeted with the stream of diarrhea one would expect from such ludicrous, insane, mind-boggling choices. Instead, you're treated to Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, an incredibly well-executed turn-based tactical RPG in the vein of the excellent XCOM Enemy Unknown. The gameplay itself is deep and well-balanced, requiring a lot of thoughtful strategy, but featuring special abilities such as bouncing off teammates to deal damage and traverse the battlegrounds. These additions refer effectively to the Mario series' platforming roots, resulting in a neat blend of strategic action and acrobatic fun. The heightened mobility of both enemies and player characters promotes an aggressive playstyle, and the game therefore keeps pushing forward rather than getting bogged down. The game's design is also dripping with visual personality throughout, and its beautifully animated cutscenes convey a lot of satisfying physical comedy. The Mario Rabbid hybrid abominations are nothing short of genius in their portrayal, and of course you get to shoot rabbits in the face with a shotgun. It's the closest you'll ever get to that minion murdering fantasy we all share. 5. The Mummy Demastered. Whether your favourite cinematic iteration of The Mummy is Universal Pictures' 1932 pre-code masterpiece, Hammer's macabre and atmospheric 1959 work, or the swashbuckling 1999 remake of the original is entirely up in the air. Nobody's favourite, however, is the truly forgettable 2017 Tom Cruise vehicle, which resulted in Universal's abandonment of their much-touted, upcoming Dark Universe. A tie-in video game was developed for The Mummy 2017 and somehow managed to not suck. In a bizarre inversion of the classic excellent movie, terrible game trend, The Mummy Demastered was a 2D Metroidvania reminiscent of the absolute best entries in the genre. Taking place concurrently to the events in the film, the player controls a prodigium soldier under the command of Dr. Henry Jekyll, and interestingly, when killed, is thrust into the body of a different soldier who then has to retrieve their equipment from their zombified former self. The game's pixel art is gorgeous, closely resembling later 2D Castlevania titles, and the gameplay shows a mastery of the genre, showing it a level of respect not commonly seen in tie-in works. 4. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. The Resident Evil franchise has a fascinating cycle of death and rebirth over its nearly 25-year history. Its original trilogy on the PS1 was clunky but effective and tense, codifying survival horror as we know it.
Just as it was starting to feel tired and repetitive, Resident Evil 4 dramatically shook up the formula with its campy, action-oriented romp, and massively influenced the action and shooter genres as a whole. Seriously, I love that game. I love it. But then they slowly started bleeding Resident Evil to death once more, with following expansions marking a steep decline, resulting in messy, cluttered gameplay, atrocious writing, and a total absence of, horror. How then could the series possibly recover? Once again, the formula was to be shaken up. Taking influence from such titles as Amnesia and Outlast, a new wave of first-person survival horror titles, low on combat and high on tense, high-stakes evasion of unbeatable enemies. Resident Evil 7 took those titles as claustrophobic first-person insta-kill horror and mixed in just enough combat segments to create a unique blend that was both tense and terrifying, as well as exciting and cathartic. 3. Wolfenstein: The New Order. The first-person shooter is king, and Wolfenstein was where it all started. Okay, so technically FPSs existed as far back as the early 1970s, but 1992's Wolfenstein 3D truly ushered in the genre with its ultra-violent action. Reducing Hitler to a pile of giblets was one of the game's defining moments. After a string of sequels that were decidedly lackluster, with the exception of 2001's fantastic return to Castle Wolfenstein, the series was floundering. World War II was a stale setting, with the industry turning its gaze to more modern locales, and Wolfenstein's bombastic tone was falling behind more nuanced, character-based storytelling. And then Machine Games struck gold with 2014's Wolfenstein: The New Order. Set in an alternate 1960 after the Nazis secured victory, The New Order succeeded in both exhilarating Nazi head-stomping and tender, emotionally resonant character interplay. B.J. Blazkowicz, a man the size of a tank with the ability to dual-wield automatic shotguns, carried a sense of vulnerability, a tragic weariness at a war that he may never be able to win. His determination, however, resulted in gameplay that was louder and more exciting than ever. And there's a bit where you drown a Nazi in his own piss. Perfection. 2. Spider-Man 2. Until 2004, Spider-Man 2, video games had not been kind to the wall-crawler. After his early 2D outings, most of which were generic beat-em-ups and appearances in Marvel superheroes and Marvel vs. Capcom-like games, the web-slinger starred into, pretty serviceable PS1 titles and a short, dull entry on the PS2 as a tie-in to Sam Raimi's 2002 movie. These 3D titles all made the same mistakes, setting too many missions in pokey indoor environments and relegating Spider-Man's most iconic trait, the web swinging, to a perfunctory automated method of getting from rooftop A to rooftop B to rooftop C. Oh, sorry, is the game still going on? I fell asleep holding the R2 button. But then Spider-Man 2 came along and kabow! Yes, this is how you do it. This is how you, yes, cliche, I know, feel like Spider-Man. Loosely based on the Sam Raimi sequel, and this time set in a reactive, open-world realization of Manhattan, swinging around the city and living the life of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man was front and center. The art of swinging between buildings and traversing the landscape was wonderfully implemented. Each web actually had to attach to an object, and further swings needed to be timed properly to maintain momentum and steer Spidey properly. It was endless fun and had us just swinging about, thwarting random crimes for hours upon hours, and rescuing so many of that stupid kid's goddamn balloons. Just hold on to it, Timmy! Just hold on to the damn balloon! 1. Doom, 2016. If Wolfenstein was where first-person shooters truly began, then it was Doom that propelled them violently and viciously to stardom. Such is its universal recognition, it was even referenced in Friends, and yes, that is the height of success. It's interesting that while Wolfenstein has spawned a large number of sequels, spin-off and reboots, Doom has had comparatively few. Doom 2, whilst a solid game, was essentially just more Doom. Very little had been done in terms of graphical or gameplay enhancements, and areas of improvement concerned the use of larger levels above all else. Doom 3, released 10 years later, was technically groundbreaking, but lifeless. Its simplistic AI and over-reliance on cheap jump scares in uninspired environments made for a game that was playable, but forgettable. As years passed, realistic military shooters such as Call of Duty dominated the scene, and storytelling took center stage. Was a franchise based on bombast and raw, aggressive gameplay, for the lack of a better word, doomed? Not on your damn life. Its fourth entry, simply titled Doom, ripped and tore its way into systems in 2016, treating players to a true blue update of Doom's original premise, to kill demons and never goddamn stop. With its unrelenting action, crushing industrial gent soundtrack, and visuals stained red with fire and gore, Doom is a game so intense you'll feel both empowered and frankly exhausted. And there you have it, folks, 10 brilliant video games that surprise everyone. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at USlideDollView. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.
Horror movies are ostensibly about evil. Sometimes it's flagrant evil. Sometimes it is insidious evil. Sometimes it is all children are inherently evil, but it is always in there in some capacity. That's because the sort of thematic threats that exist in other genres never really translate as scary. Yes, the global conquest presented in most action films clearly marks out the antagonists as actually bad, but they seldom have you scurrying.
Phew.
For all of our other units, we're going to use the exact same method we just used with our base color, the brown, and then the white highlight, but we're going to use a different base color instead of the blue. For all of the Blade Guard and Leader figures, they all kind of share a visual language, so I thought I would paint them the same. They all use a slightly purplish gray color. Afterwards, once I gave them their brown and white highlights, I just used my airbrush to sprinkle on a little bit of dark blue ink highlights to give it that mottled shark skin look. For our heavy gun boys, I thought that the way that I customized them made them look a little bit like crustaceans, so I thought we would paint them like the famous red shark from the ocean. And again, we use the same color scheme, but instead of the base blue color, we are using a mix of our copper color and a little bit of cavalry red. For the executioner and the chaplain, we used the same colors as everything else, but instead of our blue color, we used a dark gray color. With all of our base coats out of the way, let's move on to our metallics. Cavalry red. For the executioner and the chaplain...
Oh, ow, shit. Got glue on me, damn it. Okay. Well, that sucks. I don't know how that happened, but this is how genes die. One super glue stain at a time. It's too bad. Ouch. Didn't realize that I had that on mute. Okay, so all we're going to do to wrap this up is just apply a very basic sand mixture. around and work our way backwards. Oh, sorry, buddy. I didn't see you there. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry.
We used the same colors as everything else, but instead of our blue color, we used a dark gray color. With all of our base coats out of the way, let's move on to our metallics. Although all of our troops look very different in color, they're all going to be painted in pretty much the same way, so unless I say otherwise, each of these steps is going to be applied to pretty much all of our Marines. For all of our metallics, we're going to just be using these two colors of paint. We're going to be using the copper to paint the shoulder rims, some parts of the weapons, and the little copper circle on the back of all of the Marines, as well as some of the little trinkets and holy symbols on the leader figures. Then we're going to use our aluminum color to paint pretty much every other metallic part on the models. To keep things simple, I pretty much just mimicked the way the box art looks in terms of what should be silver and what should be gold, and I just replaced all the gold parts with copper. For the bikes, we are also using these same two metallic colors, and we're just going to vary it up in terms of where we put the metallic colors. You can see here the way I've chosen to paint them. And for all of the other figures, we're going to use the same metallic colors in the same places on pretty much all of the models, with the exception of our red boys. They are not going to have copper on their shoulders, so we can leave all of the copper parts off of our red boys because it doesn't contrast as well on those as it does on the other figures. After we're done with all of our metallics, we can switch to our non-metallic colors to do the rest of our base coating. We're going to be using 4 main colors here for most of our base coating.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and call it and have lunch, and we're going to come back after lunch.